Welcome back to, I think this is our third installment of Truly Knowing. And we've been talking about things that you probably might have just been taken for granted. Not that it was a big deal, because it's not really all that important in the scheme of things. But, if you're like me and you like to think about stuff and you like to know stuff, thinking and picking up books and finding out what other folks have to say about things, that's the way you learn. And of course, I balance all of the things that I learn. I balance that according to the will of God. I know it sounds crazy. People say, "Oh, but Dave, this is an antiquated book. What can it possibly have to say about science in our age, or the philosophical zeitgeist of the era?" If you know what zeitgeist is, that means the spirit of the age. What can the Bible have to say? It's just a book about morals. Well, it is. It's got morals in it, but it's got a whole lot more too. I'd like to give you one example before we go into the final three questions of Truly Knowing today. Do you know that for the longest time, well, if you read the account in Genesis especially, but not just Genesis, but all over the Bible, when the creation event is spoken of, you're going to find that whether it's Moses or the prophets or the Lord himself or the Apostle Paul, everybody who speaks of the creation refers to God having spoke things into existence. And of course, we look at that and we say, well, that's what does that mean? That's meaningless. You can't speak anything into existence. You speak and people listen, or they don't listen, or they throw something at you, but you can't speak anything into existence, but God can. And so for the longest time, somebody would simply say, scientists might say, well, see, this is what makes the Bible a book of metaphors and allegories, and you really can't count on it in terms of its scientific merit, because it's not speaking scientifically. And I've always suspected, and as I've grown older, I've come to realize that just the God of the Bible's methods, the things that are said here, tend to be a lot more scientific than meets the eye. And I'll give you a great example. I read, I shouldn't say I read it, but years ago, I want to say 10 or more years ago, I came up with the theory of how speaking can, and I'm talking about speaking on a very special level, the vibrations in particular on a very special level, can bring constituent parts of matter. We're talking about subatomic particles at this point, but bring particles into existence. And of course, people would laugh and say, "Oh, well, that's ridiculous, blah, blah." Well, it turns out that just last year alone, we have learned that people are now adjusting. Not when I say people, I mean scientists. Scientists are now beginning to adjust their thinking because they're finding that vibrations are bring into existence subatomic particles. And when this was proven, and the peer-reviewed reports came out, this shook people up, and it didn't shake me up because I had already been there already. And it sounds crazy, but they're now saying that vibrations are what brought things into existence in the first place. And you can find this out on your own. Just do a random. I prefer you use DuckDuckGo, but if you use Google, go for that. But if you use the search engine, just put in vibrations, subatomic particles existence, and you'll see there's brand new information about how they're changing the way they view how things came into existence. And the joke that I tend to say is that, well, eventually science is going to catch up with God, and I think in this instance they probably have. So having said that, we've been talking about 7 questions, things that you probably thought you knew until somebody asked you. And the first one was what is time? And I showed you my guys writing books about called About Time, but can't tell you what time is. We talked about energy or matter, only briefly, only to say that it seems to be here. You can't get rid of it. You can only convert it. And it's a very peculiar thing that you can't create energy and you can't get rid of it. So, but what is it? They don't know. What is life? What is a person? Now that's something that we can know. And I described to you at least what I believe in my heart. And I believe that the will of God dictates what a person is. And I live by that. And I hope you do too. So that's one we can know. We can't know what time is yet. We don't know what energy/matter is, but we can know what a person is. What is consciousness? Nope. Can't tell you what that is right now. Can't do it. We can explain what we think it is. We can explain how it operates. We can even start to think about perhaps that it can be transferred, such as Jeff Bezos and his desire for transhumanism. But what we can't do is tell you what it is. So what about the final three? Well, one of these is going to shock you, and I think it's going to be this one. And I'm going to tell you in advance that you can know what this one is. You can know. But for most of the world, this is kind of a mystery. And that is, what is love? Remember the two nuts, Jim Carrey and the other guy on Saturday Night Live, and they'd have that song and they'd be bobbing back and forth while the song What Is Love is playing? Well, love, what is love? What is it? And at first, if I were to ask somebody that, they would give you an example. They would say, well, this is an example of an outworking of love. And they probably would be 100% correct. But in terms of describing exactly what love is, this becomes a little bit more difficult. Can be done, but it's just more difficult than you think. I'm going to give you one of the most stunning examples of what is love that I ever saw in my whole life. If you know me long enough, you're going to hear this story eventually, so I'd love to share it with you today. And a long time ago, I met a man, and his name is Avi. He was a Levite. He was a Jewish man, a Levite. And there was a wonderful story behind Avi, but how I got to know him. And we're not going to go into that today, but that is a story for another day. But for today, I want to tell you about when Avi had finally said he was here in America, and he lived with us for about 9 months. I had found him a job, and he saved up his money living with us. And he finally called for his wife and 2 kids from Tel Aviv, Israel. And they came over, and of course I got to know them as well. And I learned a little bit about what a typical Jewish family was like through them. And it was a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I don't mind telling you, I witnessed to the wife. The wife's name was Zippy. And Zippy she was open and receptive to the word of God. And I made her a promise. I made her a wonderful promise. And it's a promise that I would hope that most Christians could make to their Jewish friends if they really wanted to. I told her I wanted to witness to her about the God of the Bible. I wanted her to meet someone who she probably assumed that she knew quite a bit about, but I didn't think so yet. And I said, if you give me the opportunity, I'll do it from your book alone. I'll introduce you to your God, my Christ, the plan of salvation, and I'll just use your book alone. And better yet, let's use it in your language. And we did. I had weekly Bible studies with her, and it turned out to be wonderful. But as I got to know the family, they invited us over one night for dinner. And so I wanted to I want to roll in this what is love concept here. And Avi was still an atheist. For those of you who know me, living with me for 9 months, you'd think almost I'd be able to convert anything, including the termites underneath the house, if you live with me for 9 months, because that's all I talk about. That's all I talk about is the Lord, and I talk about the Bible, and I talk about salvation. This is always at the front of my mind. But Avi was a tough nut, and Avi never cracked. He even went to church with us, which was the rule of the house. On Sunday mornings, we got up and we went to church, and that includes all Jews too. So we did go to church, and he didn't even mind, really. He liked spending time with us. So we had become quite close. But he was not a converted Jew. So one night at dinner, we were talking about this, and I knew he was going to be in trouble. I confess this is an evil thing for me to do. I completely set my friend Avi up. I wanted to know what was love for Avi. What is love? And because I knew Avi was an atheist, and if you know somebody's an atheist, well, that pretty much narrows it down to what his worldview is like, and his worldview is going to be materialism, that is evolution, goes with materialism. And he was going to have to try to explain this from the point of evolution and have it be meaningful to his wife. And I knew this was going to be a terrible problem, and it was. So he went on and on about how reproductive this, and we have to carry the genes on that, and he was going on all tech, and he thought he was doing a wonderful job. And so the wife is in the kitchen cooking, preparing what's a traditional Jewish meal for us, and you could, the smoke was coming out of the kitchen, but it wasn't from the cooking, because she realized something. She realized that he didn't love her. And out of nowhere came a plate flying through the air, and it hit the wall, and it just missed him too. It almost nailed Avi. And she stormed into the living room where we were talking, and she said, "You don't love me." And I said, Boom. It's exactly the outcome I was shooting for. Evil? Maybe. Effective? Yes. And so what is, if you're a materialist, if you're an evolutionist, what is love? It's nothing but the carrying on of genes. And don't try to sell me otherwise. You may be attracted to somebody, but that's because you want them to carry your genes. Trust me on this. I know this game. And so that's a big problem if you're an evolutionist. If you're an agnostic, you can be kind of on the fence about it. And you can say, well, maybe this, maybe that. But if you're a Christian, well, we know what love is if you're a Christian. And as a matter of fact, there's 4 different kinds of loves in the Bible, and we can know what they are. Well, for example, one is, and well, I'll save the best one for last. But the one that you have, like I have with my producer friend, producer Marty, and we have a brotherly love, a phileo love for each other. I've got his back, he's got my back. If he needed something, he knows I'd give it to him. And if I needed something and he could give it, I know he'd give it to me. That's brotherly love, and it's a beautiful thing. All right, and that exists hopefully throughout the most of your friendship circle. There's also, without going into graphic details, to put your hands over the kids' ears, but there's eros love, and these are all in the Greek. They're all in the Bible. There's eros love. And that's a love that a husband and his wife should have together, and that's it. Not a guy and a girl in the back seat. All right, that's not love. But the kind of love that's being expressed through the natural relationship of a husband and wife, that is the way God views that's the way that kind of love should be regarded. It shouldn't be abused as we tend to. Listen, I was a world-class abuser I was fornicating all half my life. And I don't know how many guys listening to this can't say the same thing when they were younger. Okay, so that's heavily frowned upon in the Bible, in case you're wondering. So you can abuse any of these kinds of loves, but generally speaking, brotherly love is a beautiful thing. The eros love is a beautiful thing. Then there's the storge love. Storge is in the Bible. It's a compound word in the Bible. It only appears once, but it's family love, the love that you have between family. And something that I imagine all of you will be experiencing as we move into the Christmas season. You'll be celebrating the love you have for your family. You'll be showering them with gifts and hopefully remembering Christ was born somewhere along the way. And then the other kind of love is the true love that all Christians should know and embrace, and that's the agape. And that's the one that you hear about most from Christians. And that's the kind of love that's impersonal. That's the kind of love that makes it possible for you to care about somebody that's utterly despicable, that's utterly abhorrible, reprehensible. But you should still have the agape love for that person the same way that God has for that person. And that's tough. That's tough. I'm just going to tell you right now, I struggle with politicians. I struggle with politicians because they make laws that I find reprehensible, and, you wind up saying in your head, boy, the sooner this person stops pumping their Lord, the better. That's not correct. I'm not going to defend that. I'm just going to tell you unfortunately, that's a default position of human nature. We think these things, but you're not supposed to. You're supposed to have the kind of a God, because I'm not going to pick on anybody. There's a number of people in the world of politics who I really can't stand, but yet I have a yearning to be with them privately, speaking with them about greater things than whether or not to seal the border, because I want them to come to know the Lord. Because if they come to know the Lord, guess what, folks? Everything else is going to work out afterwards. If you truly come to know the Lord and you begin that journey of understanding what the kind of love is that God has in mind for how God loves you and how he expects us to love each other, then good things happen after that. So we can answer that question, what is love? But most people, especially evolutionists or materialists or just basically non-Christians, let's say, will struggle with that concept. Okay, so that's fifth question. Number 6 is this is fantastic. This is a lot of fun, and you can know the answer to this one. But ask somebody what is good. What is good? If I ask them, usually they're going to give me an example. Well, good is helping an old lady across the street. Okay, could be. It could be good, unless you're helping the old lady across the street because your partner's there to grab the purse and they're going to run away. You understand what I'm saying. The act itself it's the motivation behind the act that will define whether or not an action is good. But how do you know what good is? Well, I believe that I do have a definition of good. And if you actually try to come up with a definition of good, it's very difficult. You're usually left with something sloppy like saying, oh, well, it's just helping people, the things you do that make people happy, or help them. Or you come up with some sort of a sloppy definition. And while those sloppy definitions may get you by in a pinch, I'm going to give you a better one. For me, what is good are the particular thoughts, desires, and actions that God would have of me at any given moment. Let me say that again. What is good is any particular thought, desire, or action God would have of me at any given moment. That's what defines what good is, because without God, there is no good. I'm sorry. There is no good. We're just making it up as we go along, and we might change our minds from one day to the next. For example, one of my favorite movies is the ridiculous Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, Conan the Barbarian. And Conan the Barbarian is actually asked this very question in the movie, what is good? The tribal chief says, Conan, what is good? And without missing a beat, Schwarzenegger belts out, clash the enemies, see them driven before you, hear the lamentations of the women. And everybody cheers, because that's what was good in the world of the barbarians of Samaria back then. But that is not what is good. God dictates what is good, and those dictates are whatever thought, desires, or actions that he would have of us at any given moment. And that's worth remembering. And 7, and we'll close out with this, is what is truth? What is truth? The philosophers have given up on what is truth, I assure you. The deconstruction era of philosophy is so alive and well right now that nobody's even pursuing it. The concepts of good and evil and right and wrong are being stricken from the philosophical records. And it's because they're being honest. Because without a moral lawgiver, there isn't any, or there aren't any. All right? Without a moral lawgiver, there is no truth. There's no right or wrong about a thing. There's no good or evil about a thing. Without a moral lawgiver, without a God, there is no truth. Now, somebody may counter and say, well, Dave, that's ridiculous. The pursuit of mathematics is an impersonal, absolutely objective field. And I'll agree with that. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about life and living. Things that we can objectively know, identify, and operate under as truth. That is being stripped in our age. It's being stripped in real time. It's being stripped in your children's grade schools, certainly their high schools, and absolutely the colleges. So we have one more section on truly knowing something, but we've gotten the 7 questions out of the way. I hope that that's been enlightening for you. And I'm going to move into asking you a question that we can know the answer to, and I'm going to be delighted to tell it to you if you've never heard it before, and maybe expound on it a little bit more if you had. So that's going to be the subject for the next section or segment. Thank you for listening, and remember, words have meaning.